The chandeliers in the Liberty Falls National Canine Training Center shimmered above the polished marble floors, casting soft golden glows over rows of velvet-lined seats arranged with military precision. Men in tailored suits adjusted cufflinks that gleamed under the light. Women in sleek, dark blazers reviewed glossy brochures bound in leather. The scent of polished wood, expensive perfume, and quiet ambition hung in the air like a veil, thick with anticipation. Conversations curled low around crystal tumblers, punctuated by laughter that held no warmth. This was not merely an auction. It was a display of legacy, money, and lineage. A battlefield, minus the rifles, where reputations were bought and sold, alongside elite service animals. A sudden hush fell when the side doors creaked open. Heads turned, eyes narrowing. Into the silence stepped a small figure, out of place like a smudge on glass. Ellie Monroe, 9 years old, with hair neatly braided. Down her back wore a faded navy hoodie, 2 sizes too large, and sneakers dulled by dust. She held no brochure, no bidder's card, just a worn canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and the quiet weight of determination stitched into every step. Murmurs rose before she'd crossed the threshold. Some laughed softly, others leaned close, to whisper behind gloved hands. She heard phrases like, "Who let a kid in here?" and "She must be lost." She kept walking. On a wall beside the stage, a large screen rotated through digital profiles of the dogs up for auction. Photos, service records, assessments, and accolades. One name appeared more than the others, etched in stark bold letters against a dark background. Valor, German Shepherd. Age 6, combat veteran. Handler deceased, unrehabilitated, highly reactive. Owner, waiver required. Projected starting bid, $15,000. A star attraction for all the wrong reasons. Ellie's gaze locked on the image of Valor. The scars on his muzzle hadn't changed. The notched left ear, the heavy stare that knew too much. Her pulse quickened. He was here. She moved quickly through the side corridor where the kennels were, temporarily housed. Her footsteps muffled against the rich carpeting that lined every hall. A uniformed guard stationed near the restricted access area narrowed his eyes as she approached. Before he could speak, she raised her chin slightly, as if bracing herself for the rebuke she knew would come. "Visitors aren't permitted in this section," he said, stepping forward, especially not unaccompanied minors. She didn't shrink back. Instead, her hand slid into her hoodie pocket and retrieved a folded piece of paper. A temporary permit, scrolled with her mother's signature. It wasn't official, not in the strictest sense, but it was enough to make the guard hesitate. He looked it over, eyebrows drawn, then glanced past her shoulder. "You're not on any list. Who exactly are you here to see?" Her voice was quiet, almost drowned in the noise of distant speakers announcing the next lot. "Valor," she said. "He'll know me." The man studied her a moment longer, as if debating whether to laugh or lecture, but something in the girl's face, an unwavering stillness that didn't belong to someone her age, made him pause. He exhaled sharply and stepped aside. The kennels were clean and bright, each pen fronted by steel bars and reinforced glass. Most of the dogs paced restlessly or barked at every movement. Not Valor. He sat at the far end of the row, tail still, eyes alert. As Ellie approached, he rose slowly, ears pricked. A low sound rumbled in his throat. Not aggression, not quite recognition either, but something that caused the air around them to shift. She stopped 3FT from the glass. They stood like that, girl and dog, the silence between them denser than any words. His stare never broke. Hers didn't waver. Her palm hovered briefly, pressing to the surface as if to reach him across the barrier. A kennel assistant caught sight of them and came hurrying down the aisle, her voice hushed but firm as she approached. "You're not supposed to be here. This dog is dangerous," Ellie said without looking away. "I know." The assistant hesitated, visibly unnerved by the calm in the girl's voice. "Then you should know better than to get close. That animal's been through 6 failed reassessments. Nobody can handle him." Ellie finally turned. He had a handler once, and they never gave him time to grieve. The woman blinked, thrown, off by the certainty. Before she could formulate a response, an announcement boomed over the intercom. All guests to the main floor. Lot 41 begins in 5 minutes. Ellie stepped back. Valor didn't move. His gaze followed her until she rounded the corner and disappeared into the stream of returning bidders. The hallway swallowed her again, folding the moment between them into something unspoken. Back in the auction hall, the seats were nearly full. Names printed on white cards marked every row. Generals, investors, breeders, contractors. The air shimmered with anticipation as the next lineup prepared to begin. But at the far back, one empty seat remained unmarked. Ellie slid into it unnoticed. Across the room, a man in a deep green suit adjusted his cufflinks, eyes fixed on his brochure. Colton Hale, owner of Hale Tactical K9, former defense contractor, rumored to be searching for his next headline acquisition. He hadn't looked up once when Ellie entered. On stage, the lights dimmed. The screen blinked. Lot 47. Valor. And in that moment, the room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Behind all the whispers, all the silence, all the rehearsed expressions of practiced bidders, a girl in a faded hoodie sat perfectly still, watching, waiting. And outside the ring, in a pen not far from the door, a dog lifted his head toward the lights. He remembered the scent of dust, the sound of a voice that sang not with command, but with comfort, and something in his body leaned forward as if gravity itself had shifted. He remembered, and he was not alone. Long before the chandeliered ceilings and polished shoes of Liberty Falls ever knew her name, Ellie Monroe belonged to a world of sharper wins and quieter victories. Her story didn't begin with that $60,000 bid, nor did it begin with the silence that fell when Valor met her eyes in that crowded auction hall. It began years before, under the shadow of a home built on discipline and devotion, beside a man who had taught her that loyalty wasn't something you trained, it was something you earned. Tom Monroe had once served as a tactical dog handler for a covert unit stationed overseas, the kind of assignment no one talked about over family dinners or in community newsletters. He didn't wear medals on weekends or speak of the lives saved or lost. He only ever spoke about valor. Ellie remembered his voice changing whenever the dog's name passed his lips, firm but gentler somehow, like a soldier remembering the only friend who understood the weight he carried. The dog, a lean German shepherd, with a sharp intelligence and a temper to match, had been his shadow, moving through smoke and dust and gunfire with a kind of precision that never made the papers. The last time Ellie saw them together was the morning her father left for his final deployment. The sunrise had barely broken through the Colorado haze, and Valor had sat at the edge of the porch, ears forward, body rigid with purpose. Her father had crouched beside him, whispering something into the dog's ear before turning to her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Keep the porch swept, Elle. We'll be home soon." They didn't come home. The news arrived 3 weeks later, wrapped in an official envelope and delivered by strangers in crisp uniforms. No one told her how Valor survived the ambush that killed her father, only that he had gone missing afterward, presumed dead or feral. The military stopped asking questions. The handlers moved on, but Ellie didn't. For 3 years, she waited. She watched every news clipping, tracked military dog recovery sites, searched online forums where retired soldiers whispered rumors of Valor's survival, always angry, always impossible to control. She learned to read between the silence. Then came the file. Her mother had found it by accident, buried inside a military archive flagged for declassification. It was thin, barely 2 pages, but Ellie recognized the description immediately. The scar along the flank, the command responses in check, the aggression spike after handler separation. Valor had been found in bad condition, treated briefly, and transferred from one failed rehabilitation center to the next until finally placed in a government auction roster, Lot 47, listed under unfit for service, behavioral risk. No one knew the dog the way she did. She sold her bike first, then her video games, her art supplies, anything with value. She wrote handmade signs offering tutoring to younger kids, walked neighborhood dogs for a few dollars a week, and turned every birthday and holiday into a chance to save a little more. Her mother, initially resistant, watched the obsession grow, until it no longer looked like a child's stubbornness, but something deeper, grief that had calcified into a mission. When Ellie asked for help securing a cashier's check, her mother didn't question the amount. She only asked, "Are you sure he'll remember you?" Ellie had nodded. He already does. Now, after the auction's echo had faded, she sat in the transport bay behind the hall as handlers moved other dogs in crates and on leashes, barking and yelping in confusion. She waited for them to bring him to her. No crate, no muzzle. Eep had come willingly into the holding room, but his eyes remained wary, still locked behind years of orders that had never come. When they finally opened the gate and stepped aside, he didn't bolt. He walked slow, deliberate, nose twitching. He came to her. Ellie didn't reach out. She simply knelt, lowering herself to his level and let the moment stretch. Valor stopped inches away, exhaled once and sat, his flank brushing her knee like it had once on the porch steps of a home now empty. The handler, an older man with white whiskers and a jaw like a brick, crossed his arms. Never seen him do that for anyone, not since they pulled him out of the rubble. Ellie didn't look away. He wasn't lost, just waiting. Behind them, voices echoed. Organizers, staff, and a handful of bidders still lingering. She heard her name mentioned, followed by skeptical tones and clipped disbelief. The rumors had begun. A girl, a war dog, a check for $60,000. Everyone wanted a reason, and no one had the answer they had expected. She led Valor to the trailer without words. The ramp creaked under his weight, and for a brief second he hesitated. She didn't pull, just waited, holding the lead rope with open hands. After a moment, he stepped forward and entered. By the time the truck pulled away, the sun had slipped low behind the hills. Ellie sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the coarse fur of his back. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing the shape of old scars and faded patches. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn away. They rode like that for miles. Two survivors of a war neither had signed up for, bound by a promise no one else remembered. The world had already labeled Valor too broken, too angry, too lost to reclaim. But Ellie knew better. Her father once said the hardest thing in this life wasn't fighting. It was being seen after the battle ended. The air inside the main hall of Liberty Falls had shifted. Earlier it had been filled with murmurs and low laughter, the casual arrogance of wealth circulating like perfume. Now, as the next lot was announced, that hum hardened into something brittle and electric. Lot 47, Valor. There was a rustle of fabric, the clearing of throats, the faint clink of crystal as bidders leaned forward. Ellie stood near the back, mostly unseen, but not unnoticed. Her small figure pressed between the polished oak paneling and rows of well-dressed spectators whose eyes were now locked on the ring. The auctioneer's voice changed too, dropping an octave, letting the name draw its own weight through the room. Valor. The name alone carried stories few dared to speak. Aloud, rumors of a dog too broken to serve, too dangerous to place, but also one forged in the crucible of war. Trained with precision, most could never understand. The handlers led him into the ring without ceremony. No leash, no muzzle. The crowd watched, closely, expecting violence, waiting for the flash of teeth or the sudden lunge that would confirm everything they had heard. But Valor didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He walked slow and calculating, his movements tense, but controlled. His coat was still matted in places from the long journey, scars cutting through patches of coarse fur, his left ear notched from an old wound. His eyes, dark and cold as obsidian, scanned the crowd without blinking, resting only briefly on the auctioneer before shifting elsewhere, as if searching for something else entirely. A hushed anticipation filled the hall. The auctioneer cleared, his throat and began, his cadence practiced. Opening bid, $15,000. One hand rose from the front row, a man in a gray suit whose expression said he expected to win. Another bid followed from the left, this time a woman with platinum hair and a red leather binder tucked under her arm. $19,000, then $25,000. The tempo picked up quickly, but Valor didn't move. He simply stood in the center of the ring like a sentinel carved from stone, unmoved by the hands reaching skyward. The numbers exchanged like currency of war. Ellie's breath caught as the bidding crossed $35,000. Her fingers tightened around the padded edge of her seat, heart thundering so loud it blurred the edges of her hearing. The cashier's check in her pocket weighed 1,000 pounds. It was everything, years of waiting, sacrificing, believing. And now strangers were calling out numbers as if he were nothing more than a prize to be won, as if they could take him home and fix what only time and love had touched. $40,000. A sharp bid from the right. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone mentioned the name Colton Hale, ranch owner, investor, former Special Forces consultant. He had entered late, now seated with one leg crossed over the other, and a knowing smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had power here, and he knew it. His voice cut through the room when he offered $45,000. The way he said it, lazy, dismissive, made Ellie's stomach tighten. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She rose slowly, stepping forward one aisle, then another, ignoring the way heads turned, the disbelief in their eyes. At the far edge of the ring, Valor turned, too. His ears pricked, body angling slightly. And though no sound passed between them, the recognition in his stare was immediate. It steadied her. The auctioneer's voice faltered for the first time. $45,000. Do I hear $50,000? Silence. A pause long enough to feel like eternity. Then Colton again. $55,000. Laughter followed, dry and edged with condescension. He glanced over his shoulder, not directly at Ellie, but just beyond her, like she didn't even matter. The room tilted with expectation. That would be the winning bid. Of course, it would. No one would go higher for a dog labeled unfit, unstable, untrainable. Ellie stepped forward once more. Her hand rose slowly, deliberately, the motion clean and undeniable. $60,000, she said, not loudly, but it carried. The room broke open. A wave of disbelief swept over the crowd. Someone muttered she was bluffing. Others turned in their seats, craning to see who dared. Ellie didn't move again. She held the check, the envelope visibly creased from the pressure of her grip. The auctioneer blinked, took a half step back, then nodded stiffly. $60,000 confirmed. No one spoke. Colton didn't laugh this time, his jaw clenched, fingers drumming on the armrest. He glanced toward the auctioneer as if to object, to question the bid, but he said nothing. The room felt like it had lost its voice entirely. Even the usual clicks of pens, the shifting of papers, the casual clatter of anticipation had vanished. The auctioneer's next words were simple, almost reverent. Sold lot 47 to Miss Monroe. There was no applause, just a long, uneasy pause as everyone recalibrated what they thought they knew. Ellie exhaled slowly, her knees nearly buckling. With the release of pressure, Valor watched her still. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. But when the handler opened the gate, the dog didn't resist. He stepped toward her with the same quiet resolve that had defined every moment since they locked eyes. In that charged silence as Ellie took the lead rope in her hands and walked him down the ramp, she didn't feel like the child everyone had dismissed. She felt something older than herself, something deeper. Not victory, not defiance, just the ache of something long lost finally returning. Colton Hale stood slowly, expression unreadable. The other bidders whispered among themselves, already rewriting the story. But Ellie didn't hear them. She walked out of the hall with Valor at her side, and the kind of silence that comes only after a storm, when the wind dies down and the world learns to listen again. By the time Ellie stepped out into the hallway with Valor at her side, the quiet wasn't just residual shock. It was the kind that settles after something sacred, something irreversible. The heavy doors closed behind her, muffling the stir of whispers that followed. A few lingering staff moved aside, watching the pair with cautious awe, their earlier dismissiveness smothered by the spectacle they had just witnessed. The dog that had nearly ripped through handlers earlier now walked beside a 9-year-old girl, with nothing tethering him but memory. The corridor seemed longer than before, the polished floor stretching ahead in uneasy stillness. Behind them, the auction continued, voices rising again, but they no longer carried weight. The biggest moment had already passed. Ellie paused near the edge of the hallway, her hand brushing along the thick fur at Valor's shoulder, her mind not yet fully absorbing what had happened. The check was gone. The money had been real. The moment had been real, but it still felt like a fragile dream that could collapse under its own truth. She didn't see the ripple of movement in the crowd that had begun to gather again near the back doors. People who had sneered at her, who had turned their backs and laughed, were now drifting in clusters, craning necks, murmuring questions. Not about the bid, not about the dog, but about her. Someone asked too loudly who she was. Another repeated her name, Miss Monroe. Confused glances, half-remembered stories. A woman in a pressed riding jacket whispered to her companion that she recognized the last name. Monroe. Wasn't there a Tom Monroe who trained service dogs for the military? A few heads turned, eyes widened. Pieces began shifting into place. Down near the refreshment tables, an older man with a limp and a navy pin on his lapel leaned on his cane and stared hard at Valor. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, like acknowledging something long understood. He leaned toward the young volunteer by his side and said without theatrics that Valor had served in Kandahar, saved 4 lives in a collapsed radio outpost, and vanished during the last ambush. They never found the handler. Only later did they learn he had a daughter. In the next wave of whispers, Ellie's name began to echo with new weight. Not the name of a child who had stumbled into wealth or staged a stunt, but the child of someone the community remembered, someone whose name still stirred respect. And Valor. Valor was no longer the cautionary tale of a broken animal. He was the one who had survived, who had waited, who had remembered. A few reporters caught wind of the story unfolding, their lenses tilting to follow the girl who was no longer just an anomaly. Some lifted their cameras, others reached for notepads, trying to find the beginning of a story they had all nearly missed. But when one stepped forward to approach her, another hand gently held him back. "Let her be," someone whispered. "This isn't the time." Ellie didn't look back. She led Valor toward the side corridor marked for official pickup. A handler trailed behind at a respectful distance, offering nothing but presence. It was then that Colton Hale reappeared, cutting across the tiled floor with a kind of forced casualness that didn't quite hide the fire in his stride. He was flanked by one of his aides and wore the expression of a man trying to salvage pride in front of an audience that had already moved on. He didn't speak at first, just stood near the hallway exit, hands in his pockets, watching Ellie with that half-smile that never reached his eyes. When he did speak, his voice was louder than necessary baiting. He asked if she thought buying a dog made her an expert, if one grand gesture meant she belonged here. Ellie didn't stop. She didn't answer. Colton stepped forward again. This time, the edge in his tone cracked. He said she didn't deserve a dog like Valor, that she was too young to understand. What kind of responsibility came with owning something trained to fight? Valor paused. The movement was subtle but sharp. His body shifted slightly, placing himself between Ellie and the man. Not aggressive, not threatening, just there, present, protective. It said more than any words could. Around them, the hallway grew still. The aide next to Colton swallowed visibly and took a step back. One of the staff near the corner adjusted his earpiece and radioed for the main office. Voice low, tone careful. Colton didn't try again. Ellie kept walking. The air outside had turned cooler by the time she reached the side lot. A truck waited, engine idle, ramp lowered. A woman in a shawl stood nearby, the transporter. She had watched everything unfold from the far end of the hall and offered no questions. Only a quiet nod. Ellie helped guide Valor up the ramp. He hesitated for a breath, then stepped in without a sound. The door clicked closed behind him. The silence, inside the trailer deeper than anything the hall had held. Before she climbed into the passenger seat, Ellie looked back once. The auction house loomed behind her, tall and distant now, the gold trim of its facade catching the last of the afternoon sun. She didn't see Colton anymore, didn't hear the mutters, but she knew the shape of the story had changed. Valor was safe. The name Monroe had returned. And somewhere in the hush that followed her departure, those who had watched it all unfold began to remember the lesson they had almost forgotten. That real legacy isn't built on money, but on memory, and the quiet, steady strength of loyalty that outlives even war. The sun had long dipped below the ridgeline when Ellie and Valor reached the gates of Shaw Canyon Ranch. The drive back had passed in a kind of reverent silence, the winding roads veiled in the soft blue hush of evening. The only sound came from the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional thump of Valor adjusting himself in the trailer. But even those noises felt distant, like echoes from another world. The envelope that had once held the cashier's check sat now on the passenger seat, empty and crumpled, its edges frayed like the worn seams of Ellie's hoodie. Outside the window, the world had begun to change again. Shadows stretched long across the dry hills, and the sharp angles of the desert softened into silhouettes. The air smelled of mesquite, dust, and the kind of silence only an open road could carry. When the old ranch gate came into view, flanked by iron posts and the wooden sign her father carved years ago, Ellie pulled the truck to a stop. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open, her hands trembling, not from the effort, but from the weight of return. Valor waited inside the trailer with the same stillness he had shown on the auction floor, yet something in his posture had shifted. No longer tight with tension or coiled in suspicion, his frame now held a different kind of alertness, one that looked like memory coming home. She unlatched the gate and backed the trailer into the gravel path, her breath catching when she opened the ramp. He didn't hesitate. He stepped down like he remembered the feel of this land beneath his paws, his nose lifted to the air as if searching for something familiar. The house hadn't changed. The porch light still flickered when the wind blew hard enough, and the wooden stairs creaked under weight like bones groaning awake. The corral fencing leaned a bit more to one side, and the barn's red paint had faded to a dusty rose. Yet for all that had aged and frayed, the spirit of the place remained untouched. Ellie walked ahead, gravel crunching under her boots, the lead rope slack in her hand. Valor followed without prompting. No command, no pull, just trust, just history, just the echo of a bond that had once shaped them both. Ethan had been waiting, though he said nothing when they arrived. He watched from the porch, his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes reflecting something caught between disbelief and awe. He had heard, of course, about the auction, the bid, the stunned silence that followed. The whole town had, but no story told could capture the stillness of this moment, the way Valor stepped across the ranch boundary like someone returning from war. He moved slowly, his paws careful on the loose earth, but with every step the uncertainty bled from his body. Ellie unlatched the main corral gate, letting him pass through, then dropped the lead. She didn't need to hold him anymore. He didn't run. He didn't bolt. He circled the yard once, paused, then laid down in the shadow of the porch, his chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. The light from the windows caught the edge of his fur, revealing every scar that had once marked him as damaged, unfit, unredeemable. Yet here, in this place, under this sky, he looked whole. Ellie sat beside him, not speaking, just resting her hand against his side. His breath warmed her palm. It was enough. It was everything. And in that breathless hush, the kind only nightfall could bring to the desert, the world tilted back into something like balance. Later, when the media called, she wouldn't answer. When the neighbors came by with questions, she wouldn't offer stories. When strangers reached out asking what made her believe she could do what others couldn't, she'd say nothing at all, because some answers weren't meant to be spoken. That night she opened the old notebook her father had once kept, a ledger filled with training logs, field reports, and scribbled notes about Valor's progress. She added, only one line. He came home. No explanation, no flourish, just the truth that mattered. The stars stretched wide above Shaw Canyon, silver threads stitched into a velvet sky. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the silence of the house wrapped around her like an old song. In the barn, the other dogs had stirred at Valor's return, but soon quietened, as if they, too, sensed what had shifted, as if they, too, knew a guardian had returned. Ellie sat long into the night, Valor's head resting against her thigh, her fingers tracing the outline of his ears, her eyes unfocused, but her heart wide open. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for this, the simple presence of something good that chose to stay. She thought of her father. Then, the way he used to whistle at the end of each workday, the rhythm of his boots on the porch, the weight of his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't grieving, but because this moment wasn't made for tears, it was made for gratitude. Dawn came slowly, brushing gold against the mountains. Valor rose first, stretching with a quiet groan, then walked the edge of the property, pausing now and then to sniff the earth or watch the horizon. Ellie followed him with her gaze, not needing to call out. When he returned to her side, she whispered just once, "You remember, don't you?" He didn't answer, but his body leaned into hers the way it had when they first met, back before the war, before the silence, before the world decided who he was and what he wasn't. Insante, that lean was a story no one else could tell, a vow made not with words but with presence. She stood then, brushing dust from her jeans, her hands steady. The ranch was still waiting. Fences to mend, feed to spread, gates to oil. But everything felt different now. Not because of what had changed, but because of what had returned. Valor moved beside her, not ahead, not behind, just there. As he had been, as he was meant to be. And with the first rays of morning turning the sky to fire, Ellie stepped into the day knowing this time she didn't have to walk alone.